I'd like us to try to imagine, could you go to the next slide, please? I'd like us to imagine what it would have been like to live 250 years ago. I say imagine what it would be like, but the truth is 1 out of every 3 of you would have died by the age of 1. Child mortality was 1 out of 3 before the age of 1 in the 17th century. If you had survived, if you had been a survivor, your job and your lot in life would have been largely determined by your birth. So whatever status your parents were, whatever profession they had, whatever caste they were in, likely determined what you would do. It circumscribed what you would do. You may have been a manorial serf, you may have been an apprentice in an urban guild. Worst of all, you may have lived with your boss in a cottage. That's pretty rotten. All right. It is really quite rotten. Your life would have been very circumscribed. If you lived in England, you would never have gone more than 10 miles from your home unless you went on a pilgrimage. Life was very circumscribed, very poor. Your children, again, 1 out of 3 would die. At the age of 40, you would die. And the thing is, you would have no expectation that life was going to be any better for the next generation. Things have been like this for centuries. So if we look at a history of what people could produce and therefore what they could consume, if we look at per capita income for the last 2,000 years, we see it's very flat. Basically no change. At each stage, if a population went up, maybe wealth would go up, but the population would consume the new wealth. And people lived in the same level of wealth for centuries upon centuries. What are things like today? Okay, well, first of all, we have 7 billion people on the planet, right? 10 times the population of 250 years ago. You're all here. A third of you are here. Thank goodness. I can't see you, but I'm really glad that you're here. Okay. Child mortality is 52 out of 1,000. That's 0.05%. Okay. We get to live to 75. Our children don't die. That's pretty amazing. And what else happens? We have airplanes. We can fly through the air. We can move at incredible speeds through trains and automobiles. We have the internet. We have the access to the libraries of the world, to symphonies, and we have free time to enjoy videos on YouTube about cute animals doing funny things, right? That's what we have. We have a personal life, and it's really very wonderful. Most of all, we have an expectation that things are going to get better and better. Look at the end of the chart. Look at the last 200 years. What happened there needs to be explained. It's very strange. An economic historian called Deidre McCloskey calls this the great fact. Why do we have such wealth and growth and expectation of ever improving? We want 10 years from now to be better. If there's no war, we expect 10 years from now we'll be better than today. So what makes that possible? Well, the last 200 years have been the era of capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is a system of decentralized innovation, of trial and error, where people use their personal decentralized knowledge, where there's no central planning, but where people are guided by profits and loss and a system of defined and protected property rights. So what happens when you have this decentralized innovation? It's going on all around us. We heard a speaker earlier today who's trying to create a low-cost milling machine. I didn't even know that there was a milling machine in India, right? This guy has some personal knowledge about what's possible. He's tinkering. He's making possibilities. And if he does a good job, if he creates a lower cost milling machine, he's going to improve lots of people's lives, and he may put a lot of people out of work who are making other milling machines, right? But that frees up those resources. It frees up those people, those engineers, those resources to be used in other ways. And so we get what Joseph Schumpeter, an economist from Austria, called the unrelenting innovation, or the perennial gale of creative destruction. Resources are freed up and economized, and we can do more with less. I want to kind of explain the logic of this process. I said that capitalism, this decentralized process of innovation and action, is guided by profit and loss. It's regulated by property rights and by profit and loss. What is a profit? Profit means that you buy something on the market at a certain price and you sell it at a higher price. That means from the point of view of the people on the market, you've taken something that was valuable and you've transformed it into something that's more valuable. What is a loss? You've added wealth, by the way, with profit. What is a loss? A loss means you've taken resources that are valuable, that have alternate uses. You've transformed them, and you can now only sell them at a lower price. You've made them less valuable to the people around you. You've destroyed wealth. So loss is a very important signal to say, you are wasting resources. Stop it. You're harming other possibilities. You're making people poorer. You must change your behavior. And if you don't, you go out of business. And this is a very important function of profits and loss in capitalism. Not just profits, but loss frees up resources so we can become wealthier and wealthier. That's what that peak at the end in those 200 years, that's part of what it takes. So why didn't this process of creative destruction happen earlier? Well, for centuries, especially in medieval times, people were petrified of innovation. They thought, if someone takes a step without our permission, if they innovate, they're going to cause misery and unemployment. You can imagine what the social culture might be like. You say, I'd like to try something. You want to try something. You want to change? That's not done. We've done it the same way for a very, very long time. And besides, if you change, other people will have to change. You're going to put other people out of work. They will have to adapt. I'm sorry, we just can't let you do this. If you created a machine that did the job, that allowed one person to do the job of 10, you'd have groups like the Luddites who would come and smash your machine. And public opinion would be on their side. And very often law would be on their side or something like that. But an economic historian named Deidre McCloskey argues very persuasively that something different came about in the 17th century. A new moral rhetoric. People started thinking and speaking a different way, honoring different things and opposing different things. They started honoring the freedom and dignity of all individuals, all ordinary people. They started honoring markets and innovation, and they started even liking creative destruction. So let's look at some examples of this new moral rhetoric. We'll look at some levelers. There was a philosophical movement at that time. I really enjoy this quote. I am sure that there was no man born marked of God above another, for none comes into the world with a saddle on his back, neither any booted and spurred to ride him. Okay? I know the English is old, but what is the story that's being told here? It's saying that human beings are important. There is a moral equality among all human beings, among all individuals. And that moral equality needs to be respected. This new story, I'm just giving a couple of examples, but this new story starts revealing new moral commitments, the way people think and speak. Another quote, another leveler. It is a law of God and of England that no man may be put to answer for anything but wherein he materially violates the person, goods, or good name of another. So what does this mean? This means the equal freedom, the equal moral character of each individual implies a right to freedom. Some of us are not born with saddles on our backs and others with boots and spurs to ride those others. That means there's a presumption of liberty, a moral presumption that people should be free to do what they wish within limits. And those limits are, you may not hurt another person, their property, or their reputation. Okay? Equality implies freedom. So whereas before we had a situation where you had to ask permission before making any significant changes, now we have a moral story saying people should have liberty. We should presume liberty and only restrict it when it hurts the property of another. So the positive moral foundation of capitalism is this first bullet point. Property rights. What does that mean? That means that you own yourself. No one may enslave another. No one is entitled to the fruits of someone else's energy and efforts. It implies that instead of a system of mutual obligation, mutual servitude, we have a situation of mutual liberty and association by consent. So no one may benefit at the expense of someone else's freedom. This basic principle implies others logically. If you have a right to do whatever with your property and person so long as you don't harm others, you have a right to be different. You have a right to innovate with your own property. We call that tolerance, and we value it thanks to this moral story. Also implied is the freedom of contract, the freedom of associate. You may associate or disassociate. You may trade or not trade based on terms mutually agreed upon. Because you own yourself, other people own themselves. If you both want to associate, you may, but you don't have to. Personal responsibility. This means you have the freedom to try. Notice how all these things sound the same, because they are. They're from this common moral principle of property rights. You have the freedom to try and the freedom to fail with your own property. You have the freedom to try. And finally, rule of law. This is one of the most important principles. Everyone is equal before the law and must be treated as equal. No one should have any privileges because of their race, sex, background, connections, none of those things. And finally, part of the morality of capitalism is a culture that honors innovators, a culture of people who love to watch TED videos. That's part of the moral story of capitalism, right? And the ideas worth spreading. The subtitle of this event is "Only an Idea Has the Power to Change the World," right? This is the new idea, the new moral idea that brought about the creative destruction that means that a third of you are alive, and we're going to live to 75. It's amazing. Okay. So, does this principle of equality lead to a battle of all against all, a competitive process where people beat each other and steal each other's things? And, well, no, because that's not implied by the moral. What is the essence of market competition? When you go into the market, do you see people hitting each other and stealing each other's things? Well, if you do, you have a war, you have a fight. You don't have market competition. What is the essence of market competition? The essence of market competition is that we compete with one another to cooperate with others. I go into the market to offer my services, which is my right to do, and I respect other people's ability to choose my product or another's. I don't steal from them. I try to win their cooperation. So competition in the market is directed at cooperation, and it's also set in an environment of cooperative rules. I may not steal. I may not hit. I have to respect their decision if they don't go with them. If the auto driver doesn't get me and I go in another auto, he can't run out and pull me and stick me in his auto, right? So it's a cooperative process. Competition implies survival of the fittest, right? Inevitably. But survival of the fittest what? It's not survival of the fittest individuals. And again, it's not survival of the fittest individuals, where the weak individuals die and the strong individuals survive. What's in competition are patterns of human organization and ways of doing things. That's what creative destruction creates and destroys. Ways of doing things, patterns of organization, based on how well those patterns of human organization serve people, how well those ways of doing things serve people. And if you live in a society of creative destruction within the institutions of a market economy, of property rights, rule of law, then people are served better because competition ruthlessly seeks out and destroys forms of organization that don't serve people as well as others. Something that might illustrate this is the physicist Stephen Hawking. I admire the fellow. I think he's so courageous to put up with the infirmity that makes him chair-ridden. He can hardly move. In earlier times, he would have been thought of as a terrible liability. Can you imagine to think of someone so great as a liability? In capitalism, he's an asset, a person to admire. This person has written books after paralysis. That's amazing. It could never have happened before. It's not survival of the weakest individuals, but of forms of organizations that don't serve human beings well. So let's take a look at how this applies generally in the world today. If you take the countries of the world and you rank them according to how capitalist they are, how closely they approach the ideal, the moral ideal of free market capitalism. You have Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they're all up there in the top. And you break them into quartiles. It turns out the per capita income of the economically most free countries, again, is much higher, about 10 times as high as the per capita income in the least capitalist countries. Okay? Now, those of you who know something about what an average is would say, well, in those capitalist countries, maybe you have extremely uber rich and extremely poor, the weakest being harmed. Right? And the average might look pretty good. But we can actually see what happens. If we take the same quartiles and we compare them, we take the lowest 10% of the earnings of the population, the lowest earning 10%. It turns out, and this is very surprising, turns out they get about the same proportion of GDP wherever you live. So there's not more inequality in that respect. But what's not indifferent is how much an income you get. If you get the same portion of a bigger pie, you have more. And so the poorest 10% in the most capitalist countries are, again, more than 10 times better off in terms of income than those in the least capitalist countries. And even in the second quartile, you can see it's about 3 times more. As a man who just edited a book called The Morality of Capitalism, Tom Palmer, as he says, it's better to be a poor person in Switzerland than a middle-class person in Swaziland. Occupy Wall Street movement in the United States has recently made news. People are very dissatisfied with economic turmoil, and they're also dissatisfied with cronyism. That is, special privileges for bankers, financial institutions, for wealthy people. Now, with regard to the latter thing, they're absolutely right from the moral point of view. People are getting special privileges, and that's not allowed by free market capitalism. So we have to distinguish cronyism from capitalism. To the extent that they're concerned about unemployment, we have to think, does this, even if the, let's say that capitalism is the cause of this financial turmoil and not cronyism, which I don't believe, but let's say it's true. Look at what they have. Many of them are unemployed and complaining, but see the woman with the digital camera? See the clothes that they're wearing? See how much food they have? To be unemployed in a capitalist country, a dynamic country defined by creative destruction, to have to lose your job many times in your career is not bad if you have a high standard of living because of productivity, because that creative destruction makes everyone, including the poorest, better off. It is true that creative destruction in static societies can create significant suffering, where if you have static societies here and a little bit of liberalization, opportunities might disappear before new ones can emerge. So we have to be very thoughtful about how we liberalize and how we help people transfer into the new possibilities. But it's very important that we don't stop the change, that we facilitate the change. If we can overcome our fear of economic uncertainty, of the prevailing winds, the perennial winds of creative destruction, and can make the liberty and dignity of all individuals our moral story, then we can change poverty like that into poverty like that. Thank you.